the Mishnah. We continue with the general topic of the perek, the egla arufa, the situation of finding a murder victim, and the Mishnah says nimtza hahoreg. The murderer was found. At what point in time was he found? Ad shelo ne'erfa ha'egla. If prior to the breaking of the neck of the designated calf that was designated for atonement purposes, while we were not knowledgeable of who the murderer was, so teitzei v'tir be'eder, well, we don't need the calf anymore, and therefore it's set free to graze in the herd. Mishener for hegla, if the murderer, the actual murder was found, was discovered after the egla arufa ceremony took place and the calf's neck was broken, tikaver b'mukomo, it shall be buried in its place. Shal sofek bosa mitchilasa, it was brought because of doubtful, the situation of doubt. Kipra speika v'halchala, it atoned for that situation, the situation of doubt, and it's finished. So it's done what it's supposed to accomplish, and it's forbidden to benefit from it. So it's buried in its place. Therefore, egla v'achar kach nimtzo hahoreg hazeh harei yohareg. If the ceremony took place, in other words, the calf's neck was broken, and then they found the murderer must be punished. He is to be executed. There is a capital punishment for murder. The Mishnah goes on with circumstances whereby witnesses seem to contradict one another. Who do we follow? And we should point out before continuing in the Mishnah that the Torah describes the egla arufa as being a ceremony because of lo noda, meaning we don't know who committed the murder. The pasuk in Dvarim Perek Chaf Aleph pasuk Aleph, which we've included on the side, which it opens the topic of egla arufa, says ki motzei cholol ba'adama asher Hashem Elokecha noiseim l'chol l'rishta noifel basodeh lo noda mihiko. And we emphasize here lo noda mihiko. When you don't know who committed the murderer, then the process of egla arufa sets in. When we speak about not knowing, let's see, how do we evaluate the following cases? Eid echad oimer ro'isi es ha'horeg, v'eid echad oimer lo ro'isa. One witness says, I saw the murderer, meaning I saw the murder, and another witness says, you did not. Isha omeres ro'isi, v'isha omeres lo ro'is. A woman says, I saw the murder, and the other woman says, I did not. That you did not. Hayu orphan. In other words, in these two examples, we would say that the testimony cancels each other out, so you're left with zero testimony. Zero testimony means we don't know, and therefore hayu orphan, there would be the egla arufa ceremony. Eid echad omer ro'isi ushnayim oimrim lo ro'isa. One witness says, I saw the murderer, and two say, you did not. Hayu orphan. The two will cancel the one. And if the one was saying, I saw the murderer commit the murder, and the two say, you did not, so he didn't see it as far as we're concerned. Didn't see it, that means we don't know. We don't know who the murderer is. Therefore, there would be a rifa. Shnayim oimrim ro'inu v'echad oimer lohen lo ro'isem. Two say, we saw the murder take place. And one says to them, you didn't see it. Lo hoyu orphan. What the one guy says is of no value because he's going up against two. And therefore, the two saying, we saw the murder take place, and therefore we know who we saw the murderer. Therefore, there is no egla arufa, because as we said before, the pasuk says lo noda mihiko, and that's not the case here. We have a double underlining scheme which is going to highlight what we see on the side of the Gemara, the Nosay Mivneh heading. The which reads, where you see the double underline featured, Ribui Rotzchim, the increase of murders. This is Mishna, and you'll see this theme continues till the end of the Masechta, meaning the theme being as time goes on, things were getting worse and worse. In this particular instance, we're referring to increase of murder. Ribui Rotzchim Garma Lebitul Egla Rufa. The increase of murder resulted in no more Egla Arufa. Because many murders were taking place, we'll see we achieved the ability to identify who was committing the murders, or who the likely murderer was, and therefore, if we know who the murderer was, therefore no Egla Arufa. And the Mishnah also makes reference to, the Mishnah makes reference to Ribu Haminafim, increased immorality, Gormo Lebitul Me Sotah. The Sotah waters, of which we've learned so much earlier in the Masechta, would no longer be effective. And we'll see why that is. Now the Gemara, the Mishnah, continues. Mishrabhu HaRotzchinin, when murders were on the increase, when they increased, many murders were taking place. Bot Egla Rufa. The Egla Rufa ceremony was deemed to be no longer to be practiced. Rashi says, Rashi occupies both columns, so that we're looking in the we'll call the outside column, or the column that would ordinarily have the Tosfos in it. Bot Egla Rufa Sharei Makirin Bohen Mi Harogil Bohen Larog. The people knew who was most likely to be the murderer. So it can't be described as what the pasuk says, Lo Noda Mihiko. Mishabah, the Mishnah goes on to say, Mishabah Eliezer ben Dinoi, Uschino ben Prisha Hoya Nikra, Chazru Likroisoi ben Haratzchan. When Eliezer, this guy was apparently a big-time murderer, and when he came on the scene, he had been called Tchino ben Prisha. That's the name that the public referred to him as. They eventually called him Ben Haratzchan. There's more on this, what this represents, if you look in the Marsha commentary, but let's continue in the Mishnah. Mishrabhu Haminafim Posku Mayim Hamayim Hamorim. The Mayim Hamorim, the bitter waters, that's the Sotah waters, used for checking out a suspected wife of immoral behavior. The Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai Hifsikon. He is the one that said no more. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai lived, as you can see from the Mishnah, and as we know from many other sources, he lived at the time of the Beis Hamikdash, the end of the Second Temple period. And he is associated with the one who stopped the waters. There's quite a bit of discussion that one might get involved with here. Did he actually achieve high enough office at the time of the Beis Hamikdash to issue rulings? But for those who are familiar with those other Gemaras, we're just trying to whet your appetite to look into this topic a little further. But the Mishnah credits Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai as being associated with the one who stopped the whole Sotah process, the drink, the Beis Hamikdash ceremony with the water in his time. Shenamar, the pasuk says, Lo efkoid al benoi sechem ki siznena v'al kaloi sechem ki sinoafna ki heim v'chulei. The Rashi says Lo efkoid al niuf nisho sechem levodkom. The Almighty, and this is the prophet saying that a time will come that I, meaning the Almighty, will stop providing, we'll say, this checking out service that is represented by the Mei Sotah. And why am I not going to help in checking out anymore, in revealing transgressions? Why? Because al b'nosechem ki siznena, because it's a society where there's a lot of znus. V'yod ki heim im hazonos yifredu heim atzmam noafim kepredim halolo. The pasuk uses the word yifredu. It's an analogous term referring to mules that are described as licentious creatures that engage in niyuf, and niyuf meaning immorality. And what Rashi is revealing to us is that the menfolk themselves were guilty of a great amount of immoral behavior, unbridled sexual behavior, and that situation causes the May Sotah from not reacting. Mishemes Yosi ben Yoezer ish Tzreda v'Yosi ben Yochanan ish Yushalayim. When these men died, Botlu Heshkolos. We're talking about a period of time in the latter part of the second Beis HaMikdash. When they died, Botlu Heshkolos. That was the end of the Eshkolos. Shenemar ein Eshkol lechol b'chora osa nafshi. We look in the Rashi. What does Eshkolos mean? So Rashi says Meforish b'Gemara that the word Eshkolos is shehakol bohen, or we'll see the term ish shehakol bo. What does that mean? A man that contained everything. Ad yemehen, until their time, lo hoya machloikis b'chachmei Yisrael. There was no disagreement that remained amongst the sages of Israel. Kulan hoya omrim dvorim kinasinosan l'Moshe miSinai. When the Torah was passed down from generation to generation, it was, of course, before the Torah was written down in the form of Mishnayos and the Gemara. We're dealing with the oral Torah, the oral tradition. The oral tradition was passed down from the time of the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, generation after generation, without any lasting arguments. If there was any matter that needed debate, so they would debate, they would vote and come to a conclusion, and things were very, very clear. V'hein harishonim shenechleku b'smichas korbonis b'yom tov kinamim mechagiga v'oya machlokes rishon she'b'Yisrael b'divrei Torah. When it was in their time that the first, say, lasting machlokes, where the controversy wasn't resolved, that started in their generation, and Rashi points out it involved the issue of the placing of hands on a sacrifice on a holiday. One is that allowed as part of the sacrificial process or not? The topic is discussed at greater length in Maseches Chagiga. We continue in our Mishnah. Yochanan HaKohen Gadol Hevir Hoidoas HaMaiser. When a person finished his tithing, if he did it properly, so in the 4th and 7th years of the sabbatical cycle, in other words, after 3 years had gone by, that brings you into the 4th year, around the holiday of Pesach, and in the Shemitah year, there would be what's called Vidui Meisers, where people would announce, reciting from Psukim in the Torah, that they tithed their tithes according to the Torah law. In the time of Yochanan HaKohen Gadol, he stopped that. And we'll of course have to see why. Rashi says, the Rashi is referring to the psukim that we alluded to, and the reason for this will appear in the Gemara, why he stopped it. Afu Bitel, the Mishnah goes on at the end of the Omid, says Afu Bitel es ha-ma'orin ve'es ha-noikfin. He also stopped this process of the oirin and the noikfin. We'll see that explained in the Gemara. Ad yomov hoyapatish makeh b'Yushalayim u'vyomov ein tzorach lishol al hadmai. Until his days, we're at the top of Omid Beis. Until his time, the hammer could be heard in Jerusalem. Now, what is that a reference to? Rashi explains. Let's read the Rashi together at the top. Ad yomov hoya patish maki b'Yushalayim beveis hanapochim b'chol shemoed lasos melechas dover oved shemuteres b'moed. On Chol HaMoed, the intermediate days of a holiday, technically speaking, creative activity, productive activity, some people use the term work, is forbidden. It's a holiday. However, they're called Chol HaMoed. There's an element of non-sanctity to those days. Those intermediate days of the holiday are not the same as the beginning and the end of the holiday. And what is the major difference? There's leniency for that kind of work that, if not done, would cause the owner a financial loss. So there could be the types of work that would involve the activities of a blacksmith, which is a profession, an art, a craft that employs the use of a hammer that bangs and creates a lot of noise, a clanging noise. That as a result of, if he would not do that work, he would suffer a financial loss. We allow it, by letter of the law, would be allowed to be done during Chol HaMoed. However, Yochanan Kohen Gadol stopped it. Even though it's a dover ha'oved, even though by letter of the law he would be allowed to do it, he stopped it because the noise was so audible at distances, and not everyone knew that what was being done was because of it being a dover of it, and people would come to the erroneous conclusion that malacha in general is allowed during the intermediate days, so he imposed this restriction. Let's continue with the next Rashi. Kol Yomov lo hutzruch odom lish'ol l'chaver al admai. Rashi says im me'usar im lav. This has to do with tithing once again, and in his time there was no longer any need to ask his friend whether or not the tithing was done. Until that time, people that were ignoramuses, they were called amaratzim. They were not diligent in their tithing practices. So if a person who was, generally speaking, was careful, was knowledgeable, would buy produce from an amoretz, and I wanted to eat by this customer, I would ask him, you bought from the amoretz, did you tithe the tithes that are necessary when it comes to stuff purchased from amoretz? We suspect might not have tithed properly. So people would ask one another, did you do the tithing that the original farmer might not have done? But in his day, he made it a rule that any stuff you buy from an amoretz, you automatically have to tithe. If that then became the rule, others wouldn't have to ask. One would not have to ask his friend, did you do the tithing? Being that it was an established rule that anyone who purchases from amoratzim have to tithe. The Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, Minayin Shinerfo Eglovach Nimsa Horeg. From where do we know that if the calf's neck was broken and then the murderer was found, She'ein Poteris Oso, the breaking of the neck of the calf doesn't exempt the murderer. Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, Uloretz lo yechupar ladam asher shupach bo ki'im bedam shovcho. The land will not be atoned for because of the spilled blood, other than through the one who spilled the blood. So that makes it very clear that the total atonement cannot be achieved unless the murderer himself is punished, is brought to justice, and is executed. And that having been said, even though the Egla Arufa ceremony had been done prior to our discovering who the murderer was, that would not have solved, or that wouldn't have eliminated the need for the final capital punishment needed for the murderer when discovered. And here the Gemara is referring to the section of the Mishna dealing with the contradiction in testimony. Before we continue in the Gemara, we have a topic heading which reads Ne'emonus Eid Echad Be'eglo Arufa Lomar Ro'isi Es HaRotzeach. The Gemara will be looking into what's the source for the idea that a single witness is believed when he says, I saw the murderer. In general, for testimony to be binding, you need to have two witnesses. And this discussion actually is a throwback to what we saw at the very beginning of our Masechta on Daf Beis, where in the realm of testimony concerning the suspicious woman suspected of immorality, we know that after a man had warned his wife, and then there's evidence that she had been in seclusion with another man, and a single witness eventually comes along and says, I saw the actual act of intimacy, there is no further need for the Sotah. The Sotah process stops. We believe the witness that the immorality took place. The whole purpose of the May Sotah was to check out, was to reveal what for us is a state of doubt. But the testimony of one witness in the case of the Isha Sotah, he is believed, which again is a departure from the norm when it comes to the rules of testimony. Same thing over here with regard to the Egla Arufa. The testimony of a singular witness saying that I saw the murderer is enough to stop the process. Our Mishnah spoke about one witness saying I saw the murderer and one witness contradicting him, and we said in a case like that we go ahead with the Egla Arufa because it's considered still lo nodan, not knowing who the murderer was. The Gemara points out Taimo de Makrishle. The reason that we continue with the Arifa is because you have one witness saying lo roi, so you did not see the murder. Ha lo Makrishle. If you didn't have a contradicting witness, all you had was one fellow saying I saw the murder take place. Aid echad mehemon, that singular witness would be believed. Minohanimili, what is the source for that? That one witness is believed. Again, that's a departure from standard laws of testimony that require a minimum of two witnesses. Detanu Rabbanan, lo noda mi hiko. We referred to this pasuk earlier from Dvarim, Perek Chof Aleph, pasuk Aleph. Lo noda mihiko. The Egla Rufa process takes place because we don't know who murdered. Ha noda mihiko. If it is known who murdered, afilu echad b'sof olam. Even if the witness is somewhere out there in the world, lo hoyu orphan. Because if someone out there knows, we can't describe the situation as lo noda mihiko. It's not known. Someone does know. Rabbi Akiva Omer, minayin l'sanhedrin shero echad shehorag es hanefesh ve'ein makirin oisoi shelo hoyu orphan. From where do we know that if the high court saw someone commit a murder and they don't know who the murderer is, there would be no eglo arufa? Talmud lomar ve'einenu lo ra'u. The sages in the Egla Rufa story have to proclaim, we did not see v'halo ra'u, but if the Sanhedrin saw, they saw. So it doesn't conform, that scenario doesn't conform to the rules of Egla Rufa. The Gemara raises a question. Notice it's a long question, and it starts, Hashto di Amris Eid Echad Mehemon. Now that you're telling me that one witness is believed, when he says Ro'isi Sahoreg, I saw it. Now, what did we see in the Mishnah? If one witness says I saw it, I saw the murder, and another witness contradicts, they cancel each other out, and there is Egla Rufa. But that's hard to understand. When you're telling me that the Torah grants believability to one witness when he says, I saw the murder, Idoch Chad Hechi Motzi Makrishle, how can that one other witness come in and say and contradict him and say you did not see it, and then as a result we would go ahead with the Egla Arufa ceremony? For Amar Ula, is it not so that Ula teaches Kol Mokom Shehemino Torah Eid Echad Harei Kan Shnayim, where the Torah grants believability to one witness, Where do we find that? Well, we find it over here. We found it by the case of the Sotah as well. There are cases that the Torah gives believability to one witness. He has the strength of two. There's no room then anymore for the words of one witness who comes to contradict. One is nothing in the face of two. And yet in our Mishnah, we said, well, the one who says, I saw the murder, is cancelled by the one who says, you did not. How can that be? Amar loch Ula. So Ula says, Tani lo hoyu orphan. In that very case of one witness saying, I saw the murder, and the other one saying, you did not, there would be no arifa. So he's changing the language or the ruling of the Mishnah. V'chein amar Rabbi Yitzchak Tani lo hoyu orphan. And Rabbi Yitzchak says also, he agrees with the approach taken by Ula. You've got to change the text of the Mishnah by adding one word, lo, meaning they would not do arifa, because of what we said, that the one witness who says, I saw the murder take place, and as I know who the murderer is then reason enough to stop the egla rufa process. Rabbi Chia Omar Tani hoyu orphan. Rabbi Chia, though, he says, no, you keep the Mishnah as it is. Rabbi Chia Kashya Ula, but according to Rabbi Chia, is not the issue raised by Ula a problem? How can you say they would do arifa when the Torah gives believability to the one witness who says, I saw the murderer and the murder take place? He has the strength of two. How can he be contradicted? Lo Kashya. There's no difficulty for Rabbi Chia. Kan bevasachas, kan bozeh achar zeh. It all depends. If the contradicting witness who says you did not see the murder, if he comes in bevasachas together with, means on the heels of the first witness, so then the second witness cancels out the first witness. However, if it's bozeh achar zeh, if the first witness came in and said, I saw the murder take place, and the court accepted his testimony, and then later a second witness comes in contradicting him, his contradiction won't be accepted. And in a case like that, so in fact we would say lo hoyu orphan. The Mishnah, according to Reb Chia, then is talking about a case where these two contradictory witnesses came to the court together. Tanan, eid echad omer ro'isi es ha'horeg u'shnaim omrim lo ro'isa hoyu orphan. This section of Gemara is in fact basically word for word a repeat from the Gemara earlier in this Masechta. So much so that Rashi says, I've explained this entire sugya earlier in the Masechta. So I certainly hope that today is not your first time listening to our Masechta Sotah shiurim, and you will therefore benefit by having this as a section of review. What the Gemara does is he quotes what we just read, one section of the Mishnah, draws an inference from it, and then will quote a section of the continuation of the Mishnah, drawing an inference from that, and we'll see where that leads us. So we read so far from the Mishnah that if one witness says, I saw the murder, and two witnesses say, you did not see it, so those two witnesses, they cancel the first witness, and therefore there would be, as far as we're concerned, no one having seen the murder, and therefore hoyu orphan. Let's infer, ha chad v'chad, had it been one against one, lo hoyu orphan. So if one witness says, I saw the murder, and the other witness says, you did not see it, we can infer from here there would be no arifa. In other words, we're accepting the testimony of the one who says, I saw the murder. Tiyufta the Rebbe Chia. This would seem to be then a refutation of Rebbe Chia's approach. Gemara responds, Uletamech, according to you, are trying to attack Rabbi Chia from this. Emo Seifa. Continue reading the Mishnah. Shnaim omrim ro'inu v'yed echad omer lo ro'isem. Two say, we saw the murder, and one says, you did not see it. Lo hoy orphan. There would be no arifa, and now we could infer from that. Ha chad v'chad. However, had it been one against one, hoy orphan, they would have done the arifa. In other words, one saying, I saw the murder, and the other one saying, you did not see it. They would have canceled each other out, putting us back in a situation of lo noda, not of no knowledge, and therefore they would do arifa. That conforms to Reb Chia. Ela masnisen kula bepsule edus ukederebi Nehemia. The Mishnah is not to be read with inferences, but it's rather to be read at face value, and it's teaching me the laws concerning, we'll say, the acceptance of testimony by people who in other areas of law would not be accepted as witnesses. That's what we use the term psule edus. The famous common example of psule edus would be women. Women are not accepted as witnesses in general for things that require testimony. They're called psule edus. The concept of psule edus, of someone who is disqualified from testimony, does not necessarily, and just as a statement for those we'll call sensitive ears of political correctness or what have you, just be aware that Moshe and Aharon, the Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron Kohen Gadol, could not serve as a pair of witnesses. They're called psule edus. They're brothers, they're relatives to one another. So what exactly is at the root of disqualification from edus, that's another topic. That's something that one has to research. But it's not a statement of less quality of the individual, of any second-ratedness associated with the individual. It's a gzeras hakosov. It's the Torah. It's God's will. So there are, though, situations where psule edus are accepted, and we have that at hand. Uchederebi Nehemia, and in accordance with his approach, the Omar Kol Mokom Shemina Torah Eid Echad, wherever the Torah gives believability to a singular witness, Halochacha Rov Deos, it becomes a topic where you follow the majority. The Asu Shtei Noshim Beish Echad Kishnei Anoshim Beish Echad. In a case like that, two women against one man would be like two men against one man. Just like in a case of two male witnesses against one male witness, we will disregard what the singular man says. Likewise, two women who testify against one male, the one male will also be disregarded. And that's what our Mishnah is talking about. So that when you go back to the last two quotes before this, the last two Tanaic sources that we have, there's the quotes from the Mishnah. You can have the first read Eid Echad Omer Ro'isi Es HaHoreg U'Shnayim Omrim Lo Ro'isa. That would be one man says, I saw the murder. Two women saying, you did not see the murder. We listen to what the two women are saying, and therefore, as far as we're concerned, no knowledge of murderer is present, and hoyu orphan. And likewise with the Seifa, you have two women saying, we saw the murder, and one man saying to the women, you didn't see it. We don't listen to that one man. And we accept the two women, and therefore, no arifa. V'ika diamri. We continue in the Gemara. Another version of Rabbi Nehemia is as follows. Kol hecha di asa eid echad kosher meikara. If one acceptable witness comes at the outset, one adult man comes at the beginning, afilu mea noshim ki echad damin. Even 100 women would be no stronger than a single voice. So that in a case like that, let's use an example. If one man came and said, I saw the murder, and 100 women would say, you did not see it, there would be no arifa. We would believe the one man who says, I saw the murder. However, the hacha b'ma'askinan, in the Mishnah, where we saw that two overrule one, kagon da'asoi isha meikara. The first one to appear, the single witness to appear, was a woman who says, I saw the murder. And with this approach, we have to, let's say, represent Rabbi Nechemia thusly. Rabbi Nechemia Omer, Kol Mokom Shemino Torah Eid Echad. If you're in a topic where the Torah gives believability to a singular witness, as we mentioned before, the Sotah topic or the Egla Arufa topic, Haloch Acha Rov Deos. You follow, if there's a contradiction in testimony, you follow the majority. V'yosu Shtei Noshim B'isha Achas, two women against one woman, Kishnei Anoshim B'ish Echad, be like two men against one man. The one wouldn't have a chance. Aval Shtei Noshim B'ish Echad, however, if it's two women going up against one man, then Ki Palga Upalga Domi. It would have the same, say, strength as one against one. The Gemara asks, well, according to the approach taken by the Gemara that our Mishnah represents Psule Edus, and hence we come to the conclusion you follow the numbers, why do I need two examples of that? V'tarte Psule Edus Lomali. If you go back to the end of the narrow lines of the Gemara, we had a quote from the Mishnah, and then of the first wide lines, a second quote from the Mishnah. Those are two cases where we are illustrating the rules of Psuli Edus. But once you establish the rule that simply two overrule one, why do I need two examples of that? So, Mahu detema ki azlina bosa rov deos l'chumra. If I had only one example, I would have thought that we'll follow the rov deos, the majority opinion, when the result is one of stringency. Aval l'kula lo, but where the result would be a kula, a leniency, maybe then I won't follow the rov deos. Kamash malon, we reveal here that under all circumstances, whether the result is a stringency or the result is a leniency, you follow the majority opinion, the majority testimony.